In 1919, a wave of molasses as tall as buildings rushed through Boston streets, and it killed 21 people. This is the true story of one of America's most bizarre disasters. January 15, 1919, Boston's North End. What happened that day would change industrial safety forever. In the early 20th century, Boston's North End was more than just a neighborhood. It was a lifeline for countless immigrant families, their hopes and dreams packed into crowded streets. But beneath the vibrant life, danger lurked. In 1915, as the world was torn apart by war, the Purity Distilling Company hurriedly built a colossal storage tank on Commercial Street. Its purpose: to hold millions of gallons of molasses, the lifeblood of industry, fueling the war effort. No one could imagine the risk looming over their homes, their children, their future. The scale of the structure was almost unimaginable. A monstrous steel cylinder. It towered 50 feet high and stretched 90 feet in diameter. When filled to its capacity of 2.3 million gallons, the tank held a staggering 26 million pounds of thick, viscous liquid. It dominated the skyline, a dark, imposing giant casting a long shadow over the community, including the nearby Engine 31 firehouse and a children's playground. But from the very beginning, there were problems. The tank was rushed to completion to meet wartime demand. Critical safety tests, like filling it with water to check for leaks, were skipped. The steel plates were thinner than specified, and the riveting was notoriously shoddy. It was a monument to corporate negligence, built with haste and a shocking disregard for the lives just feet away. Almost immediately, the tank began to fail. It groaned and shuddered under the immense pressure as dark, sticky molasses oozed from its seams. Neighborhood children would collect the sweet runoff in pails, a dangerous game. The company's response was purely cosmetic. They painted the tank brown to camouflage the dark streaks, a cynical attempt to hide a fatal flaw in plain sight. Residents repeatedly complained, describing the unsettling groaning sounds the tank made. But United States Industrial Alcohol, insulated by its wealth and influence, dismissed every warning. They assured everyone the tank was safe, even as evidence of its instability seeped into the streets. Every complaint was a chance to avert disaster. Every chance was ignored. The tragedy was entirely preventable. And so, the stage was set. By January 1919, the war was over, but the tank remained, recently topped off with a fresh, warm shipment. On the morning of January 15th, an unseasonably mild day, the temperature rose dramatically. Inside the tank, the pressure began to build, one final, unbearable strain on the weakened steel. The time bomb was about to detonate. January 15th, 1919, began with a deceptive calm in Boston's bustling North End. It was an unusually warm day, a fall spring in the dead of winter. The temperature had skyrocketed from a frigid 2 degrees Fahrenheit to over 40 degrees overnight. For the residents of the densely packed neighborhood, a mix of Italian immigrants and Irish Americans, it was a welcome reprieve. People were out and about, enjoying the unseasonable warmth, with no idea that this sudden temperature shift was priming a time bomb in their midst. Inside the colossal steel tank, which held over 2.3 million gallons of crude molasses, a deadly chemical reaction was accelerating. The recent delivery of warmer molasses from the Caribbean, combined with the rising outdoor temperature, kicked the fermentation process into overdrive. As the yeast in the molasses consumed the sugars, it released vast quantities of carbon dioxide gas. With the tank filled almost to the brim, there was nowhere for this immense pressure to go. The tank's integrity was already a known issue. It was shoddily constructed and leaked so badly that local children would collect the sweet drippings in cans. Instead of making proper repairs, the company had simply painted the tank brown to hide the dark streaks of escaping molasses. For days leading up to the disaster, residents reported hearing ominous groaning and metallic shrieks from the structure. The steel walls, far too thin for a tank of this size and weakened by years of neglect, were now bulging, straining against a force they could no longer contain. Just after 12:30 p.m., as the city paused for lunch, the inevitable happened. Witnesses described a deep, rumbling roar, followed by a sound like a machine gun, as the tank's rivets shot out like bullets. Then, a deafening explosion tore the 50-foot-tall structure apart. The tank didn't just leak or burst. It detonated with the force of a bomb, unleashing its entire contents in a single, catastrophic moment. A monstrous, 25-foot-high wave of dark viscous fluid erupted outwards, moving at an estimated 35 miles per hour. This wasn't just a flood, it was a battering ram. The wave carried with it jagged, twisted sections of the tank's steel walls, which scythed through anything in their path. The sheer density of the molasses, about 1.5 times that of water, gave the wave an unstoppable, crushing momentum. There was no time to react. The wave was faster than a person could run, a sticky tsunami that consumed everything. It slammed into the engine, 31 firehouse, collapsing the building and trapping firefighters inside. It lifted a portion of the elevated railway off its foundations and tossed freight cars around like toys. Horses, the primary mode of transport for goods, were caught in the thick goo, struggling in vain, before being completely submerged. The initial roar gave way to a terrifying silence, then to the screams of the wounded and trapped. A chaotic scene of utter devastation replaced the familiar neighborhood. Rescuers, including 100 sailors from the nearby USS Nantucket, rushed to help, but the molasses made every movement a grueling struggle. As the air cooled, the goo began to thicken, creating a deadly quicksand that trapped the victims and would-be saviors alike. People were drowning in a sea of sweetness, suffocating in the thick, brown tide. If you're finding this story as incredible as I am, make sure to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories from history. News of the bizarre disaster spread like wildfire, with headlines across the nation struggling to describe the surreal horror. In the end, 21 people lost their lives. 150 more were injured, many severely. Victims ranged from a 10-year-old boy who had been collecting firewood to a blacksmith working in his shop. Entire families were shattered. The wave didn't just destroy buildings, it tore apart the very fabric of the community. For days, rescue and recovery efforts continued in the nightmarish landscape. The molasses was so thick that bodies were only discovered weeks later. To clean the city, fireboats were brought in to pump salt water from the harbor, spraying it over the streets to break down the hardened sugar. The cleanup was a monumental task that took over 87 man-hours and lasted for months. For decades after, on hot summer days, residents claimed they could still smell the faint, sickly sweet scent of molasses, a ghostly reminder of the day their world was torn apart. The legal battle that followed was groundbreaking. In a desperate attempt to deflect blame, the tank's owner, United States Industrial Alcohol, initially claimed the explosion was an act of sabotage by anarchists, tapping into the post-war Red Scare paranoia. But the victims' families, a coalition of mostly working-class Italian and Irish immigrants, refused to be silenced. They banded together to file one of Massachusetts' first major class action lawsuits. The case, which dragged on for 6 grueling years, saw over 1,000 witnesses take the stand. Survivors gave harrowing testimony, while engineers presented damning evidence of the tank's structural flaws. The steel was half as thick as it should have been. It hadn't been properly tested, and the company had ignored obvious signs of leakage for years, even painting the tank brown to hide the weeping seams. The court-appointed auditor's final report was unequivocal. The tank collapsed under its own weight. There was no sabotage, only catastrophic negligence. In the end, USIA was found entirely responsible and forced to pay TESS 628,000 in damages, the equivalent of over 10.9 million today. The funds were distributed among the 125 plaintiffs, providing crucial support to families who had lost loved ones and their livelihoods. For the first time, a corporation was held fully accountable for a disaster of this scale, setting a powerful new precedent for corporate responsibility in America. But perhaps the most important legacy of the flood was written not in courtrooms but in law books. The disaster spurred sweeping reforms. Across the country, municipalities began requiring that plans for any major structure be reviewed and sealed by a licensed engineer and architect. Professional certifications and mandatory safety inspections, standards we now take for granted, were born from this sticky tragedy. Today, Boston's North End is a thriving, picturesque neighborhood. The site where the tank once stood is now a park with baseball fields and a bocce court. Yet, an urban legend persists. For over a century, locals have sworn that on the hottest summer days, you can still catch a faint, sweet whiff of molasses on the breeze, a ghostly reminder of the day the streets ran brown. A small, unassuming plaque is the only official monument to the 21 people who died. It's a quiet tribute to a loud and violent moment in history, ensuring this bizarre tragedy is never forgotten. Children now play safely where once a deadly wave claimed so many lives. The Great Molasses Flood, a bizarre confluence of corporate greed, faulty engineering and unfortunate physics, remains one of the strangest and most impactful disasters in American history. If you enjoyed learning about this incredible true story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what other bizarre historical events you'd like to hear about. From the London beer flood to the dancing plague of 1518, there are so many strange tales to tell. History is full of unbelievable stories that shaped our world in unexpected ways, proving that sometimes the truth is far stranger than fiction. From a disaster born of corporate negligence and ignored warnings came lasting change. The Great Molasses Flood taught us that even the most unlikely disasters can happen when safety is ignored. And sometimes, the sweetest things in life can become the most dangerous. The victims of January 15, 1919 were not forgotten. Their tragedy changed industrial safety forever. 10 Minutes Story. Every day, a new pill of curiosity.